Initially, when we entered the first market, it was pitching the farmer diesel versus solar or gasoline versus solar and even some electricity versus solar. Now it's like, is it an Agros solar pump or is it, a random brand? If you wait to expand into new markets, well, someone will have made that choice already for you, right?
Welcome back, everybody. Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with mission-driven entrepreneurs, investors, academics, the ecosystem around the world, trying to focus on solving the big challenges that we face in our community, environments, and economy. In this episode, I'm extremely honored to be joined by Max Nelen, who's the founder and CEO of Agros, a startup that is based in Singapore, but working with small shareholder farmers across Myanmar, Cambodia, Indonesia to deliver climate-smart solutions for their farms. And his organization, one of the few startups that I've found in the Asia Pacific region that's really been able to jump across borders. So with that, Max, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here on the podcast.
So as a starting point, personal introduction, and what is the mission that you're on?
Yeah, good. So I'll start maybe with what does Agros mean? Agros is actually Greek. Greek is it's actually where the original words of agriculture come from. But it means also back to traditional farming, back to using, when we created Agros was pure to leverage, natural resources to make farming profitable again in the region, but also in a climate friendly way. And that's very important. And so what we do, and as our first product, so we're the leader, I would say, in what we call climate smart irrigation. And so we're really leveraging the power of the sun to bring down farmers' fuel bills, but also reduce carbon emissions. And so farmers, at least in Southeast Asia, and there's probably more than 5 million of those across different countries that are using either diesel or gasoline gensets to irrigate their fields. Yeah, that's just a massive issue, but not only on the planet, but also on the wallet. And so farmers today are spending up to $100 a month on fuel just to irrigate. And so you can bring that entirely down by switching to solar. So that's what we do. And we try to do that across the region of Southeast Asia.
What brought you into the ag sector to begin with? Like, what was it that, catalyzed you, inspired you, and made you want to jump into entrepreneurship?
So I was in between my two entrepreneurial gigs. I was a consultant. And so did many industries, but one of the last ones was started to become, focused on renewable energy, climate change. And so one of the last projects we did was how can we bring more renewable energy into the rural areas of Southeast Asia, which is still, in some countries, 30 to 50 or even more % of their GDP. I never really like when we do, pure climate change projects. Of course, they're important. But then you need subsidies, grants, and I think for entrepreneurs it's always very hard to scale them. But if there's a true business model that makes sense for the farmers to pay for, then for me personally, I see a venture opportunity. And so that really sparked me to then launch it because it made economical sense.
How did you, you say you kind of found that there was a business model. How did you come to that conclusion? I asked that because the solution that you're mainly promoting, at least the first one, was the water pump irrigation, that's solar. And I know they've done that in other areas where it's government subsidied. So what did you see that was different? And how did you test that model?
When we started, which was 2020, there was this tipping point. Solar, at least PV cells, became cheaper and cheaper. And we're at a price parity with even with grid now. So often startups is about timing, right? You have to time it right. If I would start now, it would probably be much harder because there's already increased competition. So we have this first mover advantage that I already saw. So that's one. I realized that when I interviewed farmers how much they're spending, then with engineering efforts, we could bring the cost of the product down. We would get to payback periods of 2 to 3 years. If you compare that with rooftop solar, is 8 to 10. So I immediately was like, okay, this is massive. This is super fast. Of course, it's still farmers, smallholder farmers. You got to offer financing. And so that's why we also launched our pay after harvests, as well as intensive after sale services. So those three combined, I realized we had a winning model.
Where did you start? You're based in Singapore, not a whole lot of farmers there. Where did you launch this? And At what point did you realize like you've proven your theory that there was a business model, that there actually is a business model?
We started unconventionally in Myanmar, but for the right reasons, because they have only 800 millimeters of rain on a yearly basis, especially in the dry zone, middle of the country, and a massive amount. They have up to 70% of diesel pumps compared to electric, just because of the lack of extension of the grid. So the problem was huge, and me as an entrepreneur, I always look at the least, where is the least friction? Where can I prove success? And later I'll figure out in areas where there's more friction, how to scale it across. But as an entrepreneur with only, back then we only had like 100K in the bank, nothing. I had to pay a few salaries of people. You want to show traction very, very early. So we took a risk, took a leap of faith, went into Myanmar, sold a lot of units, and then we expanded from there. So now we're in 3 countries.
What was your process for making those sales? I mean, you don't just rock up into another country like, hey, we have something for you. Like, how much did you understand of the economics or the situation in the country before you came in? And then how long did it take before you're making the first sales? And was it on an individual basis, or did you have, say, like a gatekeeper who could help you distribute 100 units or 1,000 units right off the bat?
It's a very good question. And when you were asking the question, I realized that I did spend much more time in the first country figuring this out than in country number 2 and 3. But to give you the answer, I spent a lot of time talking to people. So I even moved to Myanmar myself, lived there for a long time, talked to many, many people. Luckily, there was already one NGO who tried these things. So I learned already all the failures. And I think that's very important. So went for it. And then, of course, with some training and some steering. But yeah, initially, our product now looks very different from the initial one. Farmers were laughing like with the flow rates.
How
Yeah,
so?
yeah.
Like how is it so different? How is it different now than like what was the big difference? Like 1 or 2 things that were really
So
different?
it was this misconception, right? You think, oh, smallholders, I'm gonna just give them a small pump. And then they were laughing. They were like, no, we need much more water. And actually they had much more land than we expected. But we on purpose also really chose for an offline system, which was much cheaper. Much of our, not in the region, but let's say, for example, in China, even India was all IoT and online and remote control. Farmers were not like, they were just like, give me a short payback period, give me 2 years that I can pay this back and then I'll buy. And so only now, after 4 years, we're looking into IoT, which I think was a smart choice back then. So we're now nearly 10,000 systems installed. I don't think we would have gotten there with, very fancy IoT smart irrigation systems.
And will you offer both then? Like, you're going to have both available so that way you don't undercut your old market and you can kind of expand on it? Or do you realize that everyone's now equipped to do IoT and that's what the whole market's going to shift towards?
I think slowly we'll replace. We'll have to figure out what we do with our 10,000 existing, but anything new. Why? Is because IoT costs also have gone down dramatically. And so the initial incremental costs used to be $100, now gets down to 20, 30. And so the farmer won't feel that much in his $1,500 purchase. So now with the engineering team, I think we're going to go, because there's other advantages, preventive maintenance, carbon credits. So it's not only about the farmer. For us as well, we can reduce our costs down for after sales because we'll have live data from that system coming through. We can get also better funding from investors because they can. Now, when I'm trying to raise debt, it's always the question like, okay, how many pumps do you have? It's really 10,000. Can I see it? And the only thing you have is a list of, invoices. We have Google Maps and you can see our points, but these could all be, manipulated. So we want to be transparent towards our investors as well. It's like, look, this is 10,000 pumps running, how many hours per day, how many CO2 reduced. I think that's very important.
I really want to talk about the scale because I guess the initial post I found was we were mentioning that you're expanding now, and I'm curious, like, what has been the path to scale for you going into Myanmar? Then obviously each country is very different from each other. I mean, there's some similarities in say maybe the rough size of the farms, the rough crops that they're planting, the rough seasons that they have. What was your path to scale and how easy has it been along this path?
When I look at our business plan 4 years ago, I think the geographical expansion was not as aggressive in terms of countries, at least. What we realized is that the farmer trust cannot always be bought. That's one. Two is there's only so much technology moat that you can build. Of course, we're constantly engineering, reducing the costs, adding some functionalities that puts us ahead of competition. So therefore, our key competitive advantage is deep trust, reliability, level of service, and financing you can offer over a long period of time compared to your more traditional competitors who would come in and do a cheap sell, right? To build that trust, if I would go even now, we're in 3 countries, country number 4 and 5, I could wait 5 years, wait until my 3 countries are more mature, saturated. But then there might be already 3 other competitors who would figure it out. This is a huge opportunity, right? So what we've seen in our 3 existing markets, it takes around 2 years to reach a certain break-even point, as well as level of trust that you see consistent. So the first 2 years sales very bumpy, not SaaS, right? I wish it were, and I always educate our investors that it's going to be like that. So they need a little bit of patience in that regard. But we've built a playbook that is relatively replicable across markets. And so yeah, even now when I'm talking to some of investors, we're looking into Vietnam. They're like, okay, but slow down. It's like, no, but it's really we have to go now to get that trust because it takes 2 years, and then we have first mover advantage, right?
But does this push require you to fund at a higher level than you would normally do that, or like you can't wait for the organic sales to support everything, or how
A
does
little
that
bit, yeah.
impact?
So yeah, we track CAC, so customer acquisition costs, slightly higher. We see it go down over time as we start to look into digital channels. But initially, yeah, that's the cost, the price to pay, I would have to say. And I don't like the word cost. And I said it a few days ago to another investment. It's ROI. As long as the ROI is positive, I invest marketing now to acquire my first 1,000. The next 10,000 is going to be much more affordable to acquire. And that's just what we need to understand. And that's the way the model works. And sorry, and maybe a long answer to your question, but I think it's very important, right? So initially, when we entered our third market, some of the people on the ground and then also some of the leadership there was like, we should go through distributors. I was like, yeah, interesting. Yeah, they have much more access to farmers, can go, yeah, of course, but they're asking 20, 30%, right? So a lot of your margin is gone. And then also it's like, product is not known, brand is not known. They're not going to do the marketing for you. They will distribute if there's inbound demand. It might be cheaper for them to install. I agree. Hold stock, offer financing, maybe not always, right? But that's what we've been seeing. So I always tell them, look, we have to go to 2 years of heavy working B2C, direct to consumer, get the trust. And only then the distributor will say, oh, yeah, look, they've installed 1,000 systems. People are knocking on my door. Do you have solar pumps?
But there's a bit of a trade-off, I think, and I've seen this in China for many years, you can move into the market a little bit faster through a distributor, but you're right, they're not going to build your brand for you. But if you come in on your own, the investment required is so much more significant. So is that a consideration for you, say going to 4, 5, 6, 8, if you're moving really fast? Or does this mean that you do go a little bit slower just because you want to be a little bit more intensive about the brand and make sure you maintain that moat? Like, is that a consideration up front, or is that something that you just know right away, like, we're going to do this 2 years for every country, distributors can come later?
The truth tells me now that it's the first one. Indeed, you have to go through the first 2 years and then flip it up. But we'll still try. Let's say with a more mature market like Vietnam, I'm looking at for now a distributor first model and see if it works. If it does, then okay, we'll prove ourselves wrong, that our playbook is maybe not in all markets. And I've talked to other companies as well. Like one company I really appreciate does like biodigesters. And they've been through a similar journey. They're already 10 years. So they're different product, but same customer, if you will. Dairy farmers, but again, still rural area. And they've done same 3 markets direct, then went to now they're in more than 10. indirect, but very selective partnership, and almost selecting entrepreneurs like they would be your own subsidiary. So selectively training them, telling them, look, this is how our model works. Are you willing to partner up? Maybe even do a stake, small JV. And I think that works. So that I'm looking for, if I can find that, but it's not like any random distributor. Yeah.
Have you thought about, or are you looking into collaborating with, say, another group of entrepreneurs that are in the same space, climate smart solutions, and you're kind of coming in a portfolio to scale? Because I think I've seen dozens of entrepreneurs in this space who are all struggling, but they all have interesting potential applications, and sometimes they're overlapping. They would actually make a really good merger case, right? But have you looked at maybe working with another portfolio of, say, 2 or 3 other entrepreneurs in the region? You're like, look, you do this, which is the same thing, you're working with the same farmers I am, but it's a different product, so we're not competitive, but we could work together to cross sell or share or add value to. Have you looked at that model?
Yeah, 100%. And theoretically, I think it makes so much sense because you're sharing the CAC, right? I think it's a mix of, well, most of at least entrepreneurs in ag that I know are relatively early stage. So everyone is just in survival mode. So partnerships are always exciting, first 2, 3 meetings, but then I think one of the parties always drops the ball. Second is also, I mean, the asset is the farmer, right? At some point, I remember one of my people asking me, Max, is the asset the pump or is the asset the farmer? And I said the farmer, right? Because that's where you can upsell other products. I didn't think there's a little bit of protection also, especially in hardware, because they realize it's a one-off sale. I will have to go back to that farmer to sell him something else. And then there's a little bit of, so I think for us, it would be, for example, we looked at liquid fertilizer companies. Those are very compatible and can be actually sold and bundled together because they could be applied through our pump. So that partnership has worked because then you can easily bundle. But for example, selling a solar pump with random granular fertilizers for farmers is also confusing unless they get a huge discount. But then unit economics also might not make sense. So I'm looking at maybe some sensors, companies that deploy moist sensors, for example. So anything, I'm now looking at tech startups that want to work with us that could link to the pump somehow, either through an input or through an IoT that can make it more efficient. Yeah.
What kind of ecosystem or bundle would you want to see come together that would make that process easier for you, or the process of scale easier for you?
Yeah, I think finance and insurance. Yes, those are the biggest one. Of course, tech to make the CLTV a little bit higher for us over a 10-year period, but mainly finance and insurance. Like for now, we've been providing on balance sheet up to 12 months, but it limits our reach to farmers who can pay it back in 12 months. So they will need additional cash flow, as well as insurance. So we had a few instances where there's a flood, there's a drought, farmers cannot pay, they're delaying their payments, or they're even an earthquake, their system was damaged. And so we're constantly on the break, actually, and having to reject customers or not going to a certain area. Not that they cannot afford, just their payback is 3 years. If they're doing rice, for example, which is very tiny margins, yeah, so we've been selling to rice farmers, but they had other income streams. They were running a shop. They were, and then you can pay that. So it's just pure cash flow matching. Yeah.
And do you think that part of the ecosystem is coming in? Like, is there insurance coming online? Are there finance mechanisms that are supporting you now? Or do you still find that, yeah, there's a lot of talk, but in reality, no one's putting the powder into the mix?
I wouldn't say no one. There's definitely more talk than action. I think everyone is always overestimating the hard work of agriculture. So you need a few, the rare breeds that are willing to do the hard work, I would say. Financing, yeah, a lot of people have been burned, but I think not for the right reasons because they've been financing inputs, which is a consumable that cannot be retrieved. For us, it's an asset that can be collateralized. So it's more about regulation. Like we talk to big banks, they don't want to change their collateral policies. They usually just take collateral on the land, no questions asked. Then there's uncollateralized, but then it's 5% per month, which is ridiculous. And so we're trying to find the financial partners that say, hey, okay, I'm willing to price at 1 to 2% per month, but hey, you give me a buyback guarantee and we go. And that's been the hard part. And I'm willing to give that buyback guarantee because I know my product has a payback period, unless there's some, disaster, which again, we can insure against. So that's the lever of growth for me.
Interesting. What are some of the other constraints that you're facing that you think are kind of holding you back from the growth?
I would say people and culture, like you said, 3 different markets, 3 different cultures, 3 different religions. A little bit early than we expected, like almost a matrix structure, if you will. Centralized versus decentralized. How many people do you put? Where do you put your supply chain, your marketing, your HR, your finance? I would prefer to handle those topics only at like Series B, C stage. We do it already at Series A, just because of the things I mentioned earlier, right? The willingness and the needs, but also the opportunity to scale to new markets faster. And so you're relying a lot on people and process, which of course entrepreneurs don't like. They want vagueness, fastness, speed. So yeah, and then hiring the people because we're headquartered in Singapore, but Singapore is too expensive. So we have to put them still in. It's central, but actually decentral. So these are central people working for the 3 countries, but based in the countries themselves. So I think that's the hardest part, like to put not too many processes, but still enough so you can control. Yeah, so I think that's the hardest part, people and processes.
How many people do you have now?
More than 100. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And
Yeah,
how many times have you, let's just say, revisited or restructured the organization? Like you sit there at the org chart, you're like, that person doesn't belong there. This is where we need things. Oh, damn, finance should be over here. Like, how many times do you think you've gone through that in your 5 years?
I don't know. Some would argue too many. Others would argue not enough. Depends who you ask. Myself, I think, yeah, maybe a little bit too much. Maybe they got a little bit patient, got to make it work. Sometimes it takes time to stick. But definitely, I got to be better at recruiting, I think, and really make sure upfront what you need. Need to spend a little bit more time than I'm used to really clearly explain what are your expectations. There's a language barrier, there's a culture barrier. And if you don't make it really explicitly clear what you expect, sometimes things happen not how you want them to be. So that's a little bit more than I'm used to in other continents, for example.
So clarity up front is important. What are a couple of the other things that you've found are really important to nail down to keep the people, not just inspired by the work, but also managing and held accountable to doing the work itself?
I always like the analogy with like actually need to hire people that that are the best athletes, not that, and the ones that can allow for 50 or 100% change, not 5 to 10%. Like we have the triple channel. I always say we're a foreign company, we're a new brand as well as a new technology. So you have this triple layer of trust you need to create, and someone who's done, and not to diminish their qualities, right? But someone who's done marketing at an established agri incumbent might not actually be the best person you want to hire. Maybe it's the one who'd never done it, who's so curious, has done a bit of marketing, and just figures it out. And so the key stars in my team are the ones that actually did come from the industry and just figured it out. And they were so hungry and they take on so much accountability that eventually they figure it out. But you got to give them the freedom, right? You got to give them incentives and the patience to do so. But those are for me the ones that perform the most. Interestingly, right? So that was quite.
I've always kind of enjoyed this balance where your first team, probably 3, 5, 10 in size, they're all on the same pathway as you. They all believed in the mission, the vision statement. Like they all knew this would be a hard climb, and they were up for it. And then I don't know, like somewhere around like 20 to 50, I find a lot of structure comes in. And you can call them corporate. I just call them more established. Like they have the tool set that you need, but they may not necessarily be on mission with the company. And you're kind of saying we need more maturity. Like we have a lot of young people, they're running really hard, they're super passionate, but we need some process. And so you kind of look to the opposite, saying, and then like you find that actually that kind of changes the culture. And I found that that can actually be really hard, because if you go to too much corporate, too much process, then the people who are passionate kind of lose their passion. And so you're kind of left like finding this balance. I'm curious, like, have you struggled with that same thing? And what is the answer at the moment for you? I know it's always evolving, but like, do you find that actually you went too far with process, now you need more passion? Or now do you find a way, like through HR process, to kind of find a better balance?
You hit the nail on the head, but I wouldn't say we went too much process. I think we went maybe too much process too fast. So I think still we don't have enough process, and still most of the people are not clear what their exact JD is, what we're expecting from them, what they need to do on a day-to-day basis, which pulls a lot of the senior management team into the day-to-day ops. So that's what I've seen. So I think there we can do a better job, but we did lose quite some people because we switched it too abruptly from like zero SOP to suddenly like, hey, you need to do this and this and that. So I think it's more about maybe it's about looking over 5-year horizon and then say this we can be vague right now. This fire we can let burn. It's not gonna, break the boat. This we really need to solve. People are not clear. One example was, for example, launching new products. In one market, super easy. You put the GM together with the head of engineering, and I intervene when needed. That was super easy. 3 countries, much more complicated. I want this, I want that. You need to set up committees. I was like sitting in those committees and a lot of discussions. And what was missing then is just easy business case. So if the GM wants to launch a new product, he needs to show market size, initial demands, and a business case. So I would say, it's very small what I changed. Just in the committee, if you don't have the business case or the market size and some initial, even if it's 10 farmers who are interested, we're not listening. So it's small changes that I would say you need to find the balance. But the most difficult thing I would say is the cascading down. I found. And that's where the biggest risk comes from, especially from the people doing the hard work on the field. I feel like in our SMT, we're always very clear on the direction of the company. But then as lower you go down, less clear. And so it's this, maybe it's communication. So how do you cascade a vision down? I think the North Star, everyone is clear. But then the more, day-to-day tactics is not always clear. And then people are just, and often I go then do blitz visits in the field, and then I realize like it's not his fault. He's just not at all clear what he needs to do. Well, we agreed upon that for like a month ago at SMT, right? So it's like, yeah.
And so is that just you spending more time in the field and building relationships and communicating, or is that you hammering your next layer down, be like, why aren't you communicating this to your people in the right way? Like, I was just out in the field, they don't get it, that's on you. Like, what's the balance there between your need to be driving this and then your need to hold others accountable?
Well, initially was the second one, which is like hammering. I found that maybe not as effective. It puts people maybe a bit under pressure, and in a not so, and some cultures, when people are under pressure, they freeze. Some cultures they become they perform better. So it's you cannot use it one size fits all. So I think now I'm going more of a I don't know if I should say this publicly, but here we go. But surprise visits and then make small changes. But without putting much pressure. And then I will maybe announce a new policy. Hey, now we're going to focus more on these kind of crops, for example. So it's more about observing and then changing some small tweaks so people fit in line. And sometimes they're like not clear, and then I explain why we make that change. Look, I've been there, I observed, and that's why we changed. But what they don't like is like, I was in Singapore, I attended 5 Zoom calls, and I make those change. No. So I have to go there, right?
How much of this are you learning by yourself through the journey, and what other support do you have outside? How do you learn, and then how do you find support as you're going through this? This is not a small incremental thing. You went from 0 to 100 in 5 years. Like, that's a very quick ramp. A lot of lessons to learn. Some of them you can learn on your own. Some of them you need help with. What's your balance for, taking it all on yourself versus actually like giving up to some mentors, some advisors, investors?
Probably too much on my own. I don't think it's the best way to learn. I heard this quote before, so it's not mine, but one of the hardest things for an entrepreneur is whose advice to trust and which not to trust. And I had that struggle myself where I had a few advisors, some were paid, some were through cash, some through equity, some non-paid. I think it's all about personal fit. Initially, I thought I was mapping out what my business needs, which is, agriculture, finance, that. So I was mapping out people, but actually I found now that I have 3 or 4 that I really have a personal fit with. And that goes much longer, right? The experts in a certain area will be very helpful, maybe the first 3, 4 conversations. But then that might erode over time, and they also might feel like they're repetitive. While someone who is a more personal fit will be much more of like your longer term, bouncing partner, almost therapist, if you will, which really slowly starts to understand you. No, really, and then I have this one person, and we meet in person once a quarter, go for dinner and drinks. Usually supposed to only last 2 hours, and often gets into 4 hours, but and I get away with much more. So yeah, I don't have a real crucial answer to it. I think it's surrounding yourself, but the hard part is whose advice to listen to and who not.
Yeah. So these the 3 or 4 that you're tied to, are they helping you more, say, on the personal mindset, confidence, and just like finding focus? Like, these are the 3 things you should prioritize, and like, just do it, man. Just go for it. Or are they actually saying, well, actually, you need this accounting system because it's the one that I use? Like, how much of it's very like mindset and like confidence and like venting versus actual just a practical, this is what you can do, this is how I've done it, or this is who to trust?
Yeah, the best advisors for me are the one who don't distract you. They keep you focused. So they will, through a few questions, and if you're good, you will be able to say what are your top 3 priorities. And that whole meeting, they will not talk about anything else. They will not go and have you thought about going into a 5th country. No. They will just keep you focused on what's and that I found is super, super valuable. Is
Where do you see this going over the next 3 to 5 years? Like, where do you see Agro going? What are some key milestones that you hope to hit? Like, 5 countries, 8 countries, 4 products. What's the goal that you're hoping to hit, and what's the impact also that you're hoping to have with these farmers against climate in the ecosystem itself?
Yeah, it's a good one. So our goal is 100,000 farmers. We're now at around 10,000. Whether that's 8 countries, 3, 5, 4 products, well, it's to be determined. Of course, we have a plan. It's more about 5 countries and 1 core product and then upselling to give you some idea. But that plan might change over time. And we as a senior management team and me personally are okay with that, right? But our North Star is we want to impact 100,000 farmers. So do times 10 in the next 5 years, which is already going to be very ambitious. And if that's true, only 1 product in 3 countries is going to be even better and probably more profitable, right? But so we'll figure that out on the go. There's no clear we have to be in 8 countries. I think the key idea is to have massive impact, but also be a profitable entity. I'm a strong believer in good foundations. I always say a house of bamboo, not a house of cars, not a house of concrete either. So you need that bamboo is a little bit flexible, can move, right? And I think that's crucial. Yeah.
All right, last question, sir. What advice would you give to another aspiring entrepreneur who's looking to launch their business? They've got an idea. They're a little bit crazy. They decide the time is right. They've got the solution. What are 2 or 3 pieces of advice you give them as they get on their path?
Unfortunately, it's not for everyone. I wish it was, because we would have more innovation. You need, as an entrepreneur, I think you need 2 things: is thick skin, and a little bit of risk takingness. You got a little bit on the crazy side. Yeah, you have to be a lot of willing to go through roller coasters a lot. And so if you're that person, and if you have very thick skin and you can go through the downs as much as you can go to the highs, go for it. if you're only there for the highs, don't do it. I don't think it's worth it. Second piece of advice that's more personal. I don't think it's for all entrepreneurs, but for the impact space, for me, it helps me to get through the downs. Profit is important. Of course, if at some point I can exit this company and make a lot of money, it's going to be great. But what gets me through the downs is much more the impact, the mandates, the fact that we're reducing carbon emissions, helping save the planet, increasing farmer profits, gets you through the very tough periods. You need investors to scale, but you need your own vision and belief to make it happen. And so there's a thin balance of accepting money, but then still doing your own thing and making sure it happens. Because if you're gonna function of your investors, it's a tricky path. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs fail because of it. So again, whose advice to trust and not is very key. So your investors might have a different, and so to get on the same path is very important. So it would be my last advice. The moment you have a board of directors, make sure everyone is looking in the same direction. If one investor wants hyper growth, doesn't care about profit, other two investors want high profit, and you want something in between, it's gonna slow down the company a lot.